it's Mike, your host of Get the Word, an etymology podcast for word nerds. We'll talk about the history and origin of words in English. If you're coming over from the English sessions, well, then I'll give you an even bigger welcome, loyal listener. The English Sessions is the podcast I've been doing for a while now for English learners, and is where Get the Word was first conceived. I decided to make Get the Word its own podcast since I started to realize I was making content more for native speakers with these etymology episodes, which seemed to warrant its own feed. Don't worry though, for those of you who are English learners, there will still be transcripts of the episodes on the website. Look for details in the show notes. Get the Word, an etymology podcast for word nerds. Available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is a short but sweet episode of Get the Word, our series on the etymology of words in English. This is a short one and is intended for advanced or native English speakers. Don't forget to head to the website, www.englishsessionswithmike.com, for a transcript of this episode. Also, sign up to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/theenglishsessions to get extra episodes of Get the Word and much more. On the Patreon page, you can also find sessions I've done with students all around the world. They may be very helpful for your learning. Also, I just recently took an IELTS test for Canadian immigration. Head to the Patreon page, patreon.com/theenglishsessions, to hear my thoughts on the test. Also, I'd love for you to reach out to the podcast. Let me know if you'd be interested in a series on IELTS or on the Canadian immigration process. Email me at mike@englishsessionswithmike.com. Today's episode is about the word often. Notice how I pronounce the T in often. I've even had my students tell me that I'm pronouncing it wrong. Let's start there. I'm going to look at the phonetic spellings from the Oxford Dictionary. Go to the website. I'll post them there. From the phonetic spellings from Oxford, we see that the T is included as an option for pronouncing the word often in both American and British English. What does that tell us? Well, that perhaps this is a regional pronunciation in both parts of the States and the UK. Where I grew up, for example, perhaps it was more common to pronounce the T. Let's make a comparison to the word soften. Now, with the word soften, there is no accepted pronunciation in Oxford that includes the T sound. So, the T in soften should always be silent, despite the fact that the word soft does have a T sound that you should pronounce. Similarly, often is an extended form of the word oft. You don't hear oft too much anymore. It's considered archaic, but pretty much has the same meaning. Same thing with soft. You always pronounce the T in oft and soft. The oft used rules of English. They're both adverbs. So if often comes from oft, who decided to throw out that T sound, and who are the ones deciding to hold on to it? We'll get into that in a little bit. Oft is derived from the Proto-Germanic ufta, which ultimately just meant frequently, much as often does today. He drank often, he drank frequently. The word often started to become common use in the 16th century, eventually replacing oft as the common word to use. According to Merriam-Webster, the T is typically silent, but has made a comeback in modern English. That's right, Merriam-Webster says it has returned. So, who makes these rules anyway, and who gets to decide what is an educated and quote-unquote uneducated way of speaking? Many of my listeners know this is not how I view language. I'll link to a very interesting article on the Atlas Obscura website about how rules such as never ending a sentence with a preposition in proper English are heavily influenced by, you guessed it, privileged, wealthy white men of the day. Or in this case, with often, it was a privileged, wealthy white woman, Queen Elizabeth I. The daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I ruled over England and Ireland from 1558 to 1603. Succeeding her Catholic sister, Mary I, Elizabeth reestablished Protestantism as the state religion. Queens get to decide what religions are dominant in their countries, and at least in Elizabeth's case, what T's are spoken in her countries. She probably wouldn't have had your head chopped off for pronouncing the T in often, but evidence shows she preferred a silent T in her oftens. Interestingly enough, evidence also shows that careful speakers would have pronounced the T in often in 17th century England. However, standard pronunciation eventually would follow the Queen's displeasure for the T. I'm sure some of you would say that few people have more authority to dictate the rules of the English language than the Queen of England herself. And to be honest, I would have to agree with all of you who are saying that. However, to be considered brutish or uneducated, or to be called even worse elitist or racist terms for one how speaks is downright wrong. Believe it or not, other words that have en endings like soften, hasten, fasten, all originally had the T pronounced. Imagine soften, hasten, fasten. Now these sound very odd with the T pronounced because the English-speaking population at large has accepted the silent T as the way to pronounce these words. There is no accepted phonetic spellings of soften or hasten in the Oxford Dictionary that includes a pronounced T. But there are accepted phonetic spellings of often with the T sound. Why is that? Why did all of these other T-E-N endings lose their T but not often? Hello everyone, Mike here. I want to pause for a moment to talk about how you can help the English sessions to continue. If you'd like to support the English sessions, then please go to anchor.fm/the English sessions. There, you can click on the support button and make a monthly contribution to the English sessions to keep this podcast going. You can support the English sessions for less than $1. Every bit helps. Also, remember, go to www.englishsessionswithmike.com if you are interested in private lessons with me, Mike. Thank you all for supporting this podcast. It's believed that the T came back in the 17th century due to spelling-influenced pronunciation. But again, why not the other T-E-N endings? This does track, though, as this was a time of incredible expansion of the printed word in England. And as I mentioned before, during this time as well, you were considered being careful with your speech when you did pronounce that T, contrary to the preference of Queen Elizabeth. So why then is pronouncing the T in often considered the more uneducated way of speaking today, when it was the opposite in the 17th century in England? amongst careful speakers of the language. It's not 100% clear from my research, but perhaps what survived over time was the knowledge of the speaking preferences of the Queen. We all know history favors the rich and powerful and the lives they lived. However, by the 1930s, dictionaries started to recognize that often was not just the pronunciation choice of the illiterate, quote unquote. The Webster's Second Unabridged Dictionary of 1934 states, the pronunciation often, until recently generally considered as more or less illiterate, is not uncommon among the educated in some sections, and is often used in singing. The Oxford Dictionary also backed up this idea. The pronunciation often, which is not recognized in dictionaries, is now frequent in the south of England, and is often used in singing. We all know, however, that this is an old entry because, as I said earlier, there certainly are pronunciations with the T pronounced that are accepted by Oxford for both American and British English. I must mention once again the stuffiness and elitist nature, historically, of teams of dictionary writers. A true illiterate person would not be able to read often or often. Of course. So why do I pronounce the T in often? Well, I do love to sing, but I'm certainly not from the south of England. Perhaps there are other regional variations in play, or perhaps I just like the way it feels in my mouth. However, for all of my English learners listening out there, always check the phonetic spellings in the dictionary. Dictionary.com has very simple phonetic spellings to read. Yes, the word often is a case where you have more than one accepted pronunciation. Many other words, including many words with silent letters, only have one accepted pronunciation. You know I'm not a language elitist, folks, but if you don't take things like silent letters into account, you run the risk of being misunderstood by native English speakers. I'd love to hear from all of you about this topic. How do you pronounce often? Do you know what was happening back in the day in the south of England? Is it considered an illiterate or uncivilized part of England historically? Let's get a dialogue going. Write into the podcast, mike@englishsessionswithmike.com. You can also leave a message for me on the website, www.englishsessionswithmike.com, where you will also find links to social media, as well as a link to the Patreon page. Head over to patreon.com/theenglishsessions for ad-free episodes and much more, including bonus episodes of Get the Word and other series, as well as sessions with learners from all over the world. Until next time, this is Mike signing off.